day. We were yesterday after the sessions doing some recapitulation and would like to discuss some of our thoughts with you in this first recap session, which will be short, and after that we will go to the agenda of the day, to the substance that will follow. I would just like to show, if you can beam it up, shortly some of our thoughts that we were putting on paper yesterday, and quickly go through those areas, and then open the floor for your comments and your thoughts, what you thought were the important observations and recommendations of yesterday. So just very briefly, we were trying to cluster a little bit the observations and remarks to different groups. So to say that we identified, and this is of course very much draft, and this is something that we just would like to put on the wall in order to generate discussion. I mean, this is not cut in stone, or it's not going to be anything that we would be reporting now, but these are just ideas. So we found 5 clusters: opportunities and potential for enhanced investment or financing of climate resilient infrastructure, the importance of data, of metrics, of standards, the importance of integrated planning, of I think that came out also a number of occasions, of not doing in silos any climate resilient infra financing or planning. The issue of de-risking and bankability, and how to improve through different instruments, means, and so on, the bankability. How to share that information between the central and local levels. How to address the needs of the different levels of project needs. The local needs may be well different from the needs of what the central planning authorities think. And then we had a very long and rich discussion about the different barriers and of the subcategories within there, about the strategic planning, policies in the wider context, also the enabling environments, project preparation, technical design, financial structuring. Some of the topics that I think also were mentioned could fit also cross-sectorally to a number of these areas. I think one important piece of information that we also saw yesterday was and I think it was mentioned a couple of times, was the fact that there is plenty of financial resources available, and we need to somehow be sure that we may catch them through different bonds, green bonds, or we saw the slide prepared by UNCTAD about what would be the potential sectors of investment areas, and what is the potential availability and financial resources available for investing to those sectors. My own intake, I think I was very pleased to see that there is plenty of evidence supporting our cause in justifying the incremental cost for climate resilient investment. We saw evidence, and we heard also from different presentators, evidence that climate resilient infrastructure investment, in fact, is only marginally more expensive to finance than classic infrastructure investment. but it gives you flexibility. It gives perhaps possibility to do retrofitting later if conditions change. We saw evidence that in African cases, there were some examples. It may enable something like 6% better return on investment. It reduces maintenance cost. And during the cycle of life of project, it ends up being more economically feasible investment. I think I leave it there. As I said, very brief reflections from the team yesterday evening. And we have something like 20 minutes for any comments or any intake, observation, recommendations you would like to make from yesterday. And those will be very, very valuable for the outcome and report of this session. So please, floor is yours. Gentleman over there. Please go ahead. Could we have a microphone, please?
Thank you very much, and good morning. I'm not seeing Dr. Paul here, the minister from Nicaragua. But when we look at point number 4, I think it came somehow from group 2, and there was a mention of the risk that is there, especially in the LDCs and seeds, and of course most of the countries in Africa, when it comes to investments. And since we'll take some recommendations from this forum, I wanted us, if Dr. Paul was here, for us to go a little bit further on point 4, that we really say what we want to say, because it will be a recommendation in the report. What we have observed is that, but Benedictus is here, I think she'll help, is that we have noted that not many investors really interested, especially from the private sector, to invest in adaptation-related investments in LDCs, of course, seeds, and most of the African countries. Thank you.
Yeah. Yes, thank you. Thanks for the observation, and we try to capture that point in the report. As I mentioned, this is just very brief overview of what happened and what was discussed yesterday, and we were trying to cluster these things. Yeah, thanks for reminding. And I think Ditas wanted to say something.
Good morning, everybody, and I thank very much Evans for that observation. Evans, of course, is representing the least developed countries also in the Green Climate Fund board, I think, at the moment. So it's very important. And what he's saying, and what I understood from the different thing, is that we have to, as the Standing Committee of Finance is a technical body, we have to look at the how to incorporate or to show the way for the realization of benefits to be derived from financing climate resilient infrastructure. That's not limited to only financial returns, but these financial returns can be reflected in terms of the social and environmental benefits. There are very many social and environmental benefits for developing countries. For instance, if you if they are given climate resilient infrastructure and help to do adaptation, then they will. There is much to be derived in terms of, first of all, environmental benefits. We are after all the conventional climate change, and also co-benefits in health. Health costs will be decreased, and this perhaps because this is mobilization of financing, can this kind of thinking can mobilize the financing that would be needed because it's not only the finance. I think Paul was also talking about externalities, and those externalities are the ones that will perhaps, that has to be internalized, and that is work that can be done by the Standing Committee of Finance. It's really very important to get this kind of thinking, which is not new. It's all over, so that the realization that the whatever is financing is given to developing countries will have multiple benefits for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ditas. Anybody else? Gentleman in the back, you were first.
Good morning, everybody. I have two remarks. The first, just to follow up on Evan's intervention on the point 4, where you use the word bankability, which means that it has its very specific sense, and it will be very interesting if what may be reflected is, of course, bankability and also fundable, which is a little bit different from what we say the financial world. When it is bankable, it goes to loans. When it's fundable, it may be grants, and here we are talking more about adaptation than mitigation. And if these will let room for adaptation activities and resilience to be well taken into consideration. The second issue, and this is in general, when you talk about mobilizing finance for climate resilient infrastructure, mobilization of finance need to come from those that have the obligation to fund climate change activities in developing countries. When we see the sessions, most of the questions, most of the activities, or most of the objectives that are in the sessions are directed to, for example, barriers at the local, community and country level. When for the country and local level, mobilization is already done through own national priorities, own local priorities. But here we are talking in this forum on mobilizing finance at international level to fund fight against climate change at in the developing countries. And I think that the sense of this forum and this thematic really is not going to the point where there is a need for mobilization of finance at international level from those that have obligation to provide funding. I thank you.
Thank you. And I'll take a last comment from this side, and then I think we have to give opportunity also to the left side. But I saw somebody here in the middle. Yes, lady, please.
Thank you. Good morning. My point was covered by my colleague Kamal. I was going to raise the same issue around the use of the term bankable. And I was going also to suggest the use of the word fundable instead. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, as I committed the same mistake as yesterday by only taking speakers from the right side, I'd have to first take from the left side. So anybody on this side of the room?
Okay. Good morning, everybody. In my opinion, it's necessary to give a special attention to the small island stage, because these effects of climate change are real visible, and this is necessary to train the population of this stage in order to be able to obtain financing for large or big infrastructure, and not to limit only small mitigation action, such as the exchange of land to constitution of biogesture, or even the replacement of fire. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Professor Chong, but do we have a gentleman in the back there? Yes, please go ahead. In the back, you were waving.
Good morning. I really just have an observation and perhaps a query as it relates to the urgency of implementing projects to address climate change and what I would probably term as internal barriers within the mobilization. And the query really is there perhaps a view that the barriers to accessing funding within the process as it relates to accrediting national implementing entities, that the barriers or the hurdles are too high? Many NIEs would already have access to various programs with multinational development banks. They can access funding on capital markets. Funding is available to implement, let's say, carbon emitting projects. It appears in a much easier way than it is to gain access to the funds. There is a very long process relative to 2020. I just wondered if I am mistaken perhaps in thinking that the accreditation process is somewhat onerous given the urgency of addressing climate change, and whether there is anything to mitigate that.
Thank you. And now, Professor, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Building on what Ditas has mentioned and also Dr. Kamal has mentioned about the co-benefit of the projects and also bankability definition, in the context, actually, yesterday I proposed one idea that how about we go ahead developing a methodology of evaluation of environmental and social benefit into the return of certain projects. So in other words, by doing this, I think we can expand the definition or scope of the bankability, the word, the definition, that at the moment, currently, it is only capturing commercial return as a bankability factor. But if we can add social benefit and the environmental benefit as another return from the project and evaluating them and included in the project, so if we can expand the concept of bankability, that might also can solve the problem as an idea. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I think we have, Alejandro, 5 more minutes. Yeah. So 5 more minutes if there are any more remarks and intakes, points you wish to make from yesterday. Suggestions, ideas, everything is welcome. Yes, please go ahead.
It was very interesting yesterday, and what I took from that was a great deal of focus on capital investment and investment in new infrastructure. And one of the challenges I feel that we're not addressing is the fact that most of the infrastructure we have today will still be with us in 20, 30, 40 years' time. And the big issue for mobilising finance is understanding operational finance. And because the infrastructure we have today will have to adapt and change, not just in terms of actually carrying out new works, but also in the way we actually operate and run those systems. So if we're just looking at mobilising finance and mobilising capital finance, we're not actually addressing the full scale of the challenge ahead in terms of developing climate resilient infrastructure. We've also got to look at operational finance as well.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, please.
Yes, good morning, everybody. My name is Jelti from the Ministry of Equipment and Transport, Logistics and Water from Morocco. Yesterday, I didn't really attend to the discussion, the meeting at the end, but through the whole day, we've been talking about mobilizing finance. And my question is, I didn't hear once about the $100 billion a year regarding the climate fund that was promised starting 2020, even once. So, is it a reality or a hoax? My first question. And I heard that the developed countries that promise these amounts are not really keeping to their word because we didn't reach that amount up to now. And if it does really exist, where adaptation fits in it? Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Indeed, the famous 100 billion of climate finance mobilized annually by 2020 is a target, and there has been quite a lot of work in order to get to that target. But we can have perhaps a separate short discussion, and if any SCF members wish to join as well during the coffee break, because it's an interesting topic.